try how far away I can put it from my face. So, does this work? Great, okay. Welcome, everyone. And thank you to Lighthouse Books for organising the Radical Book Fair, and to Mary for putting together this incredible panel and for inviting me to host this evening. My name is Tatevik Sargsyan, and I'm the founder-editor of Animot Press. I'm honoured that Animot Press's first anthology, here we go. Thank you. That the first anthology has inspired Lighthouse to organise this event, an evening of conversation and readings that break down boundaries and binaries. The first publication, The Sun Isn't Out Long Enough, is an anthology about queer experiences across borders, with a foreword by Mary Jean Chan and an afterword by Kazim Ali. Through poetry and prose, 20 writers explore themes of belonging and loss in relation to migration, language, and inhabiting liminal spaces. Animot means shameless in Armenian. Shame is universal. We can all relate to it. Shame can gather in your throat, under the tongue, in the caves of your armpits. It emerges at borderlands and in transit. So many of our desires and experiences are labelled, blamed, and shamed. Yet shame doesn't like to be shared. I established Animot Press in order to publish queer experiences across borders and other stories told with no shame. This evening, we're going to hear from 4 writers and artists exploring shamelessness, celebrating being and belonging. This event may be the first event that is in person, and many of us are performing for the first time in person, including the panelists. So please be extra welcoming. And before we start, please let's give a big round of applause to everyone. So first of all, I'm going to introduce each panelist and invite all of you to share your opening reading with us. And then we're going to have a 20-minute conversation together around shamelessness, belonging, and identity. And then we'll have a final reading and a book that you recommend that is focused on shameless storytelling. So first, I'll invite Andrés. Andrés and Ordorica is a queer Latinx writer based in Edinburgh. He is a recipient of the Edwin Morgan Trust's Second Life grant. In 2021, he was shortlisted for both the Morley Prize for Unpublished Writers of Colour and the More C. Vastrand Prize. He is the author of At Least This I Know. Let's welcome Andrés.
Hello, good evening. Can you all hear me? Okay, good. Brilliant. We're off to a good start. Yes, I am Andrés. I am a poet and writer. My first poem I'm performing for you tonight comes from my upcoming collection, At Least This I Know, which is out, thank you, in January through the lovely 404 Inc. The poem that I've chosen to share tonight comes from the work I did with the Edwin Morgan Trust this past year to celebrate the centenary of Morgan, which would have been his 100th birthday. And the work that I specifically did during my tenure with the Trust was examining Morgan's love poems to then create something in homage. And Morgan wrote brilliantly about queer love, but often he did this through the lens of memory and very specific vignettes that were very atmospheric. So this poem, I hope, is an homage to the great Morgan and something that he would be proud of. This is Neroli Kiss. They say iron girders dyed the river orange, the one we sailed down that Indian summer. My hand scooped up clementine water only to find it was me who was colored that apricot pink. But still I supped the mystic drink. While sailing down the river, my mind went with the currents, and I turned to you full of wonder, sun-stroked, open-mouthed to ask, do you ever stop to think how water might have linked our dual bodies? Coral springs, Venetian seas, salmon riverbeds, the Ganges, Rio Grande, the Don, or Dee, or somewhere in between. My mind poured out like a broken dam, overflowing onto our afternoon. Do you ever dream about a life in which we never met, or wonder what would be had I not traversed the sea? I hope you never asked these questions. But you smiled and continued rowing towards something I did not know. I looked to the city's riverbank, watching couples promenade arm in arm, and thought of that day. Your lilted tongue, each turn of phrase, capturing my attention along the Thames. On the Clyde, I cupped my hands in holy consecration, offering you a drink. You turned to me mischievous and said, "They say iron girders once dyed the river orange," but I understood it to be myth. Still, when I kissed your lips, a rusty, neroli aftertaste lingered on my tongue, and in your eyes I realized it was the sun that was our constant, the very thing we both orbited all those years until our final first kiss. There was a copper memory I left behind as we continued sailing down the Clyde. Perhaps I'll return to it in the future and find the blood orange taste awaiting me. From the banks I might see two lovers sailing down the tangerine stream, and when I do, I'll wash in its blessed blossom lock and think of you.
Thank you. Next up, Callie Rose Petal is a multidisciplinary conceptual artist and experimental musician releasing recorded work under their moniker Lonely Crap. Her latest concept album is Tatevik, an underworld opera. She's currently a resident entrepreneur with the Creative Informatics in Edinburgh. Welcome, Callie. There's going to be a lot of clapping.
My moniker is Lonely Carp. But I do always make the joke about it being an anagram of crap. So yeah, I do a lot of, well, I'm a noise artist, so I make a lot of noise. So this is a world away for me. I can't hide behind layers of abrasion. But I think that there's a similarity there, right, between silence and noise. So I'm going to read for my first work. I'm going to read a poem that became the last track on the upcoming album. And yeah, I'm just going to go straight in. It's called The Widow's Bowl. My art is a sickness, a madness, a cracked bowl of a dream, and the artifice of a tight squeeze, as if somehow someone might be holding in my mesentery, keeping all my organs in. I live as a window into others' lives, teaching them lessons about light and how it touches every disgusting thing. And I am the 10,000 disgusting things no soft light shall touch. So give me thy harshness, thy abrasion, rebuke my very eyes with almighty brilliance. I exist as an afterthought, a plaything, a paycheck to be spent. I made a deal with the devil, and he said, to create, you in your entirety must destroy every single thing to leave a trace behind. I live as a widow, being a fickle, prickly thing, hinging on a swinging door, trust encrusted in fear, rusted with fallacious apathy, and whittled by chisels into some form of femininity that might capture men as winged statues quivering on the dewy ropes I pull from out of me. Strings of violins, violas, a cello, a double bass, and the web of dirges dance in the mandibles of silence. I devour my love and wonder where it's gone. And there are months, years, feasting on my own fat stores, maintaining the integrity of my weaving, sleeping with 7 eyes open, thinking of the fragile structure I might leave behind, the tenuous and beautiful strands, divine architecture, hiding like a beaten child in the plainest of sight. God, I am hungry and praying to be remembered. I am knowing all we can hope for our bodies is that they may fill other bodies in consummation or consumption. And so I devour myself, bitter, pungent, unpalatable. I was not made to be eaten. I was born unto death as a machine, as a broken vessel, a churning roundabout, a madness, a sickness, a cracked and empty bowl of a dream. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Éadaoín Lynch, is an Irish poet based in Edinburgh, leading the Creative Scotland project, Recreation, a Queer Anthology. They have previously been shortlisted for the Jane Martin Poetry Prize and the London Magazine Poetry Prize. Their recent work is forthcoming in the Fawn Press anthology called Elements. Welcome, Éadaoín.
I'm going to stand just to be awkward. Thank you all so much for coming and welcome. Éadaoín Lynch agus anam dum. My name is Éadaoín Lynch, and this poem is called Body Language. The epigraph reads, because I'm a nerd, body, noun from Old English bodig, meaning a man's chest, but a man's is in parenthesis, extended to denote a person's form in the later 13th century. Body language. Adam's rib and a calcium breath are not the truth. I found hope there. Calcite deposits in a dank cave have more relevance. Stalactite antiques hanging hollow over shifting ground. Chesty origins seem fitting when I cannot fit into body made from a hidden word, sound created from a parenthesis of agendas, shaped from a man, long forgotten, renamed, reborn, like Eve, scapegoated into submission. My body has proved a part-time living, fig-leafed with troubled language, blooming from a man's chest, a woman's womb, a woman's biblical misunderstanding. Economies crashed when my epicene skepticism was made flesh. Living proof my form is manlier than most. Broad shoulders, butch reclining. The word handsome has beheld and held me, its gloss subdividing into sense, striking, imposing, substantial. How kind of the masculine forms to make space for me, bone of my bone, after all, flesh of my flesh. Thank you. There is more. The prompt for this panel reading was the practice and experience, or experience of queerness. So I wanted to start with this poem reflecting on queer shape, and particularly in embodiment and language. But my next poem is broader still in terms of queer shape. It's titled Dear Benny, as it's a tribute to the artistic practice of Benny Namer, a friend of mine, who is this phenomenal kind of magical sculptural artist who does research into archives of queer correspondence, and sort of does these magical gravity-defying floral arrangements with letters from queer archives. And I was moved by one in particular over lockdown to write this poem. So it's called Dear Benny, after Quelques cas favorables numéro 3. Dear Benny, a matter of the heart, suspended in weightless motion, your 8 stolen roses are perfect. Fresh from the 20e, petals like papier-mâché against the portrait miniature. Rembrandt seems affronted, though charmed by my attention. Your latest creation has cut me short, like secateurs through the stem, cambium so close to cardium. Longing for suspension, I see in your craft a softness that lifts, a touch tailored to solitude, so unexpected and so welcome. Adrift in blank space, everything is illicit. I imagine your Paris and its sex shops, desire is so French, replete with these floral debutantes and red wine, baroque pavilions, phonemes, my lips elide, j'ai allumé le feu, mes chagrins mes plaisirs. My eye drifts to the present, magnificent pink peonies gracing the vase next to me, and I know you would approve. Their bulbous, explicit stamen on show, naked by the windows for all the neighbors peeking in, and we are all weighted with borrowed time. Adrift, we prize these moments, stolen and regifted, each time a little closer to what cuts us, even when the pruning breaks our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone is in awe now. Great. Our final reader, Katalina Watt's work was longlisted for Penguin Right Now in 2020 and has been published in Haunted Voices, Unspeakable, and Extra Teeth, amongst others. In 2021, she received a writer's grant from Ladies of Horror Fiction and has appeared at various events, including the Edinburgh International Book Festival. Welcome, Katalina.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. I'm going to read an excerpt from a short story called Mango Heart, and just a content warning that there are allusions to terminal illness and disease and references to death, so apologies if that's not what you'd like to listen to right now. Nerissa is dying. That much is certain. She's swaddled in the bed, blankets pulled tightly around her. Like a burrito, she says. Like a shroud, you think. You study the skin, stretched taut around her skeletal limbs, those plump, childish cheeks now pale and veined, her rosebud mouth withered and cracked. She chews on the skin of her lip until it bleeds. You close the bedroom door and cover your face. It's taking her quickly. You came here together at her request, an isolated beach town full of middle-aged eco-hippies and organic vegan food. It's a far cry from the overgrown patch of grass Nerissa generously refers to as the shared garden. It's too close, too urban, a place where the neighbors take their dog to shit and talk loudly outside your window. Leaving the wind-worn cabin, you wander the paths aimlessly. You can breathe out here. Away from the cloying sweetness of the scented candles, Nerissa obsessively burns to sleep better. I'm bone tired, she says, but my brain is just full of bees. There's the ocean, waves crashing fast and true. You follow the sea salt as it hits the back of your throat, stinging in a glorious, alive way. You simply listen for a while. The birds are singing, and then their voices turn shrill. It's Nerissa's voice, the night she first became ill. It's in your ears, screaming, gasping for air. A branch cracks underfoot. You open your eyes to a piece of driftwood. It's part of a long fallen log, the perfect size for a bench. When you had first arrived at the cabin, at the dawn of the summer, when the air was sweeter, and it seemed as though this rest cure would actually work, this had been Nerissa's favorite spot to watch the sunset. You twined your fingers together and kissed her with a fierce tenderness, the light burning in her eyes as it reflected the last blaze of the day. You look at the branch again. It's two-pronged, like the bones of a forearm. When you get home, Nerissa is still asleep. Her pale, bony arm sticks out from beneath the covers. You hold the branch next to it, measuring. The next morning, Nerissa stirs and flings one arm over your body. She gropes for your hand and finds it. You feel the cool bark against your soft flesh. Her slim twig fingers twitch. You watch them for a few moments and then kiss each knuckle bell. Her mouth quirks into a smile as she sleeps. It's the most peaceful you've seen her since it all began. You scrub your fingers through your hair as you make breakfast. From the kitchen, you can see the rectangle of light from the bedroom door. Your eyes dart back to it so much you almost burn the pancakes. Narissa pads into the hallway. You stare at each other for a moment, and she lifts the wood, which has replaced her arm. "Did you do this?" she asks. You nod slowly. There's a moment where everything hangs between you, and then she runs her fingers across the knots in the wood's surface. "It's from the beach, isn't it?" You bite your lower lip. Her tone is restrained, and her face has shuttered now. "I'm sorry I didn't ask you. Are you angry?" "Let me choose the next part," she insists, taking the frying pan from you. You step aside and breathe again. Narissa's tongue pokes out the side of her mouth as she concentrates, flipping the pancakes. She overcompensates, and one of them falls to the tiled floor with an undercooked splat. She begins to laugh, hysterically, so much so that she is shrieking, howling. She curls over, clutching the counter for support. And then you realize she's weeping. You wrap your arms around her, and she gasps in pain. Sorry, you murmur into her ear, loosening your grip. You want to be so close to her, to bury yourself in her, to let your skin dissolve into hers. But she can't hold all your love anymore. She's disappearing like a sliver of soap. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was the first reading. We're going to have another reading towards the end of our evening, and that's supposed to be on a hopeful, fun note. So let's see what the panelists have chosen. And so we're going to have a bit of a conversation around the themes of this evening, which is shamelessness, queer identities, being and belonging. And I'd like to start with an open question, really, building up on queer identities and how it comes up in your practice, as you've demonstrated in your first readings. And it's around, what does queer joy mean to you, and how does it come up in your practice? Yeah?
So, it doesn't. My work, like, if any of you know my work, you'll know that it's depressing. It's a lot, and I don't know, what is queer joy? Is it any different to normal joy? Because I haven't experienced either. No, no, you know, queer joy for me is about fully embracing the darkness, and it's not a joke. Because, you know, as a trans woman, yeah. It's,
You're putting Callie off, though.
it's, you know, it's hard and it's painful and it is dark. But the way that I found joy is through my family, through my, you know, chosen family. And that's something that we queer people have, like, a much greater advantage to, like, probably the only thing that we have an advantage compared to the rest of the world with. And I think that my intense darkness and the way that I don't shy away from the darkness, I run towards it, throw my body towards it in my practice. And that I find after shows and whatever, when I'm performing, people come up to me afterwards and then we connect over something that is very intensely dark, but together through the connection that we share, find some kind of semblance of joy. And I think both queer joy and cishet joy, whatever that is, pancakes or some shit, yeah, is probably only measured, I mean, I think joy is just as bad as depression because it's an extreme. And really, what we're going for is contentedness, is presence, pure presence. And that can be obtained through literally any emotion. And for me, the reason that I love embodying the shadow, the reason I'm a noise artist, the reason that I scream my lungs out in front of people is because everyone understands the devil, right? Everyone knows the devil. Everyone understands the darkness inside them. Everyone knows pain, everyone knows suffering. No matter what your identity is, no matter who you are, you understand suffering. And so that's a way, it's a window through which we can connect to each other. And, you know, not everyone has experienced joy, or definitely not the same amount of joy, or the type of joy, flavor of joy. But everyone knows pain. Everyone knows what it's like to be hurty, upset. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for me, is finding family through the pain. And I won't apologize for that. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. You asked us this question, like to think about this question, so we didn't like give a sort of half-hour monologue, which is good, because I would have. That wasn't shaded.
How long is yours?
Oh, it's like 25 minutes. It's
Okay.
fine. It's funny because you know the name of the event is Shameless, and as an Irish Catholic, it's a bit close to home, isn't it? And my sister's watching, so I have to be like, man, no, not really. So the thing that I actually came across as an answer to this is when I discovered that I was queer, which came like much later in life for reasons that are now obvious. The thing that I discovered was that there was a kind of terror that came with it, not necessarily because of the obvious things, but also because I realized that like the system I had grown up with no longer applied to me. And that came as a sort of shock, because I had lived privilege until that point, and then I realized like, oh, there are countries I can't go to now. And so that took over for a long time, but the queer joy that came as part of that, which is specifically queer joy in this context, is that once you realize that you are disposed of from the kind of, you know, cisgendered heterosexual framework, you can also dispose yourself of toxic masculinity. You can dispose yourself of patriarchy. You can dispose yourself of misogyny. You can dispose yourself of sexism, colonialism, racism, ableism, and you kind of go, oh, this is so much better. Fuck, this is amazing. And so I was gonna like start this answer with like queer sex, and then was like, no, we'll break that down. So, so that is my actual answer.
So we don't have questions from the audience, but maybe we can follow up on that afterwards, just generally. Great, Katalina.
I don't know how to follow the both of you. I think for me, queer joy is, for me, that's been connecting a lot with kind of just like decolonializing my own identity as well, because I'm from the Philippines and I'm also mixed race, and so there's a lot going on with queerness on top of that as well. But actually, before colonization in the Philippines, it was a very queer-centric community. Transgender people were lauded as being like priests because they were closer to the divine, which is great. And honestly, just like colonialism completely destroyed so much of that. So for me, it's been about moving towards understanding like my ancestors and my heritage before that time and reclaiming that in myself, because Catholic guilt, I feel you. That is definitely something around kind of like my own bisexuality and this idea of, oh, but it's okay because sometimes you're attracted to men and they might be cis men, and therefore the way that you are presenting in a specific type of relationship, if people who don't understand your sexuality feel like they can compartmentalize you, and because of how you're presenting, they're like, oh, I understand this to fit in the lens of my worldview. And you're like, that's not actually the full story, but sometimes for the sake of peace, I'm aware that I can move through a space as a straight presenting person, but I cannot move through the space as a white person, even though I'm mixed race. And that's something that I feel I've had to unpack those things at the same time, because it's been impossible to kind of separate them. But yeah, just talking about it a lot more and kind of being at peace with that journey through its ups and downs has been the way for me.
Gosh, yeah, I think this is very
We'll start with you next time.
Okay. I think, Yeah, for me, all three of your answers, and this isn't me as a cop-out, but I do think I feel deep connections with, especially yours, Callie, of this idea of having to kind of go to a source of pain in order to find joy. I think especially in my poetic practice, and if you do buy my collection that's coming out in January, I think it's an idea that is working through pain to an ending that works for me at this time, and kind of taking on what Kat was saying, growing up with like a racialized identity and kind of having to unpack that, and specifically coming from my family originally coming from Mexico, being a colonized country, but knowing sort of my own family makeup, that I come both from, indigenous Mexico, but also very much the colonizer, and having to kind of unpack all of that. And I think it's like working towards a joy that at this point in my life is where I feel safe and happy. And a lot of that is about creating sort of a found family, creating a network of people where I feel at peace here in my life in Scotland. And I think it's unlearning lots of things. I too grew up very Catholic. It's inescapable. And I think, for me, my faith is still very important to me, and I've found a way for it to work for me. If you ask my very loving Catholic mother, it would blow her mind. Like, I take a bit from like Judaism and Islam and Buddhism, but it's very still centered in this kind of Christian ideology, which Sonia just wouldn't know how to process. Like, what? You're pro-abortion and pro women's right to choose, but I think for me, my queerness has been a lot of unlearning, and then spending time with people who are just way more knowledgeable than me, and getting to just really soak up their knowledge and be like, yes, that's it. I didn't know that, but I feel that. Or also sometimes it's just working within spaces where, maybe your identity doesn't totally make sense, but as you get older, I think, at least for me, I've gained enough confidence where I can sit with that, and it works for me at this point in my life.
Thank you. So I think some of you already mentioned identity, queerness, and how it comes up in the home, and your chosen families, and your backgrounds. And I like to build on that a bit, and I like to ask a question and start with a quote from James Baldwin, who said, "Perhaps home is not a place, but simply an irrevocable condition." So I'd love to know what you all think about home and belonging, what it means to you, and what brings you joy at home. This way.
Okay. For me, I think it's just knowing I have a right to where I choose to find comfort. I have a right to a choice of what makes me feel safe. I have a right to reject things that are unsafe, that are harmful, that are violent. And sometimes that's having to sort of push away things or people deep down love you, but you don't need to give all of yourself. And that may be parents, that may be siblings, that may be, your best friend from primary school that, you've stayed friends with, but they may not get you totally. They may not get all elements of your queerness or, any facet of the self. And in order to maintain, the idea of a home, it should be watertight and airtight. It should feel warm. It should feel comforting. It should be a place you want to go back to. And that's coming from a very privileged place, because not everyone has that. But I think when you're in a position where you have to make that decision to sort of build home, you're allowed to be very choosy. And I think, we've talked a bit about or mentioned sort of disenfranchisement, or this feeling that society wants to do away with us. But I think one of the few brilliant things that we're allowed as queer people is that choice. And when it does come to, my advice would be run with it and really spend time with yourself to say what serves you, because you're allowed to sort of cut ties. You're allowed to build the home you want. And for me, the home I've built is very much examining through choice and making, hard and fast decisions.
Yeah, I really relate to a lot of that. I think I've kind of chosen Scotland as my home, and I've also lived in Canada, and I think that it's been so interesting kind of having those conversations, coming from London and then moving to other places and seeing your otherness through other people's eyes, but then also seeing the communities and being able to kind of transplant yourself into a completely new place and find your people. And it's quite an organic process a lot of the time. You just kind of gravitate towards each other. And I think that I learned a lot about myself from queer communities before I even understood that I was queer. And I think a lot of that comes from this kind of international gaze, and that we're all really connected and that we're not all kind of separate in our little bubbles. And I think that it really just puts into perspective how reliant we are on each other and how we need to kind of nurture those relationships. And I completely hear you when you say the power of that choice is such a great thing, but it can also mean the power to choose to cut someone out of your life. And I think that's a really healthy thing. And I think that learning that some people will kind of hold, they will hold things in their heart against you no matter what you do. And I think being true to yourself and to the people who support and love you is the most important thing, because there will always be naysayers, there will always be people who try to make you doubt what you know to be your fundamental truth. So holding on to the people that hold you, yeah, I completely feel that.
Thank you both for those answers. I think the easiest example I can give is really an anecdote. In 2015, Ireland had a referendum to legalize gay marriage by changing the constitution, and so spoiler alert, we're the first country in the world to legalize it by popular vote. Yeah, and I went home. I don't know, I'm not being paid by the tourist board or anything. I went home to vote as an ally, as like a very intense ally who had a lot of feelings about it, a certain way. Feeling a certain way. And I like, genuinely, I had no idea. I hadn't seen Samira Wiley yet. I went back and I had harsh words with some people from home, and I voted. And then because I was such a good ally, I traveled the 3.5 hours to Dublin to watch the vote live and wept in a gay bar for 6 hours and went, I think this is awakening something. I can't quite put my finger on it. I think I'm just like morally superior. And the thing is, like, I think I hadn't realized until that point that, like, subconsciously, unconsciously, throughout the 90s in Ireland, when we had like, I don't know how many referenda that all failed, like trying to legalize abortion, and like the ways in which the Catholic Church as an institution has just like, at that point, had complete control over every aspect of life, like judicial, legal, health, education, everything. And I hadn't realized unconsciously I had understood implicitly that being queer and being Irish were sort of mutually exclusive concepts, that there were two things that I couldn't quite like coalesce. And when that vote came through and I was standing in Pantibar in Dublin, weeping, surrounded by people who I didn't know, who were all hugging me and crying and just being like so overwhelmed, I think there was like a real sense of like shock, and then like absolute like bewildered joy of like, oh my god, like it's like a dog trying to catch a bone, just like, fuck, oh my god, this is amazing. There's so much we can do now. And I think like that took like years for me to unpack and realize, oh, like this is what belonging feels like. This is the feeling that I have thought was just like anxiety the whole time. Actually, no. That's my answer. I'm gonna stop now.
Okay, what was the question? Home and belonging. Oof. There is a quote, and don't quote me on this quote.
What was it?
It was, if you can stay present, for a single breath than you are a realized immortal for a single breath. And the last 2 years, I don't know, I hate the the trapped narrative for some reason. It's a narrative that's painted, like, that I'm painted with constantly, about trans women and trans people in general are painted with constantly being trapped, X-trapped in a Y's body. Ew, I hate that. Gross. But the last 2 years, I have felt trapped by the situation, as we all have. And it was super fucking hard for me. Like, really hard. And there were times when, months on end, I wouldn't see a single soul, and I live alone, and, you know, lonely carp by name and nature. I've become very comfortable with myself through the pain, again, of the discomfort with myself. And for me, the intense agony of solitude has been such a crash course in presence. And as queer people, it's a curse and it's a gift. We get given this intense mercuriality of emotional states that it's just kickball change, you know? Yeah, exactly, jazz hands. And all throughout all of that, if you can stay present throughout all of that, then honey, you've been gaining some skills. You've been gaining some skills in consciousness, in present moment awareness. And that's home. That's the only home any of us will ever know, is just being here right now. Thank you so much. Snaps for that. Yeah, like, honey, as someone who came from Coventry.
Anyone?
Yeah,
No?
Coventry. That's Coventry.
Capsule of culture.
Next to-
See?
Sure. Next to Birmingham, you know, that one. West Midlands, represent. As someone who came from there, I didn't have the easiest time, and I wouldn't say that it felt very homely. Public transport, ooh, love that journey for me. Gross. Fucking gross. Yeah, so, anyway, in summation, the only home I've ever known is right here, baby. And I would suggest to everyone else, find that home, because, like, there's going to be times when, doesn't matter what group you find yourself in, you're going to be a wreck. And you're going to need to build yourself up again from some space. And, you know, the most important, I mean, okay, I do mean to get biblical, because we've been talking a lot about God. We've been talking a lot about God, and, you know, Noah's Ark is something that I always felt connected to, the myth, the story. That was a Freudian slip. Of Noah's Ark, because, in my opinion, the Ark was not an actual boat. The Ark is the heart. And the Ark is what we build every moment that we are present. And that will carry you through any flood, being able to be present through it, no matter what water washes over you and drowns everything around you. As long as you can be present and hold space for every living thing on earth. In your consciousness, feel the connection to every single thing on earth, then you'll be fine. And there's that, what's that up there? It's a dove with an olive branch. Anyway, that's a lot. Amen, I guess. She's upside down.
Thank you all. Given the... You want to add something?
No, I'm just... I went to church.
Great. Yeah, given the event is around shamelessness and celebrating being shameless, and as I said, I set up Animot Press with the premises of finding and sharing stories told with no shame. So celebrating that that journey that people go through shame, and then are able to share it for other people to be inspired and for other people to connect with it. I like to for us to talk a bit more about shame and also shamelessness. And I like to ask, starting with, what does shame mean to you, and where and how does it surface for you?
Sure, let's go. Right, welcome to my TED Talk. Shame, ooh, I know it well. I love shame. What a great thing. What a great thing. What a great window into your own darkness. What a great window into your own shadow. Why are you feeling shame? Ask yourself. What is going on there? There's something going on. I think that shame is the greatest window into learning about yourself, because what is that resistance? What are you resistant to? What is the oppressor that is giving you that shame? Where is it coming from? And it's super important. Shame is super important because it gives us a view to the light, to relinquish it. You know, you have to be aware of something before you can relinquish it. And as someone who's dealt with just the tiniest bit of shame, just like a smattering, I would say that that's probably been my greatest kind of inspiration in my art and my creative practice is shame. And yeah, like I said before, I'm all about embodying the shadow, embodying shame itself, my own shame. That's why my music is demonic and hinged, so loud and devastating. And I love the artifacts, the things that you're not supposed to keep in music. I like to shape into music, because that's what I feel like as a human being in my demographic. I feel like the artifact. I feel like the thing that nobody wants. But honey, I'm here. And I'm beautiful. And so is the noise, the rot, the decay. All of it is so important. And so is the shame. So yeah, be ashamed, but be wary of the shame and be aware of said shame and use it to move towards shamelessness.
Yeah, very similar to what Callie's talking about. I'm going to tell you something very briefly that comes with a content note referencing death and hate crime. So if you don't want to have to listen to that, I'm not going to go into details. You can close your ears or leave for a few minutes. I totally understand. One of the things that kind of comes around for me when I'm thinking about shame and achieving shamelessness, I realized sort of over lockdown had a lot to do with something that happened, well after I was out of secondary school. But I knew somebody who died as a result of a hate crime, and I didn't know when that happened that I was queer, and so it was this sort of retrospective grief that kept coming up in ways that I couldn't quite understand. And I realized that I'd sort of been holding on to that as a constant reminder, sort of subconsciously, of it's not that far away. And I realized that was sort of why I had kind of unconsciously postponed everything as a sort of preemptive protective mechanism. And so, over lockdown, again, I think everybody sort of went through various crises, but one of the ones that I discovered was that gender was coming up again, because this was a very camp individual who was always out, who was never in. And I think sort of unconsciously I had created this connection between you can't be flamboyant, you can't walk around wearing suits or ties, you can't do these things because it puts you at risk, even though I've never experienced it, and it's this weird sort of thing that I don't know where to put this feeling. And so I know it sounds kind of cliche, but I mean, cliches exist for a reason. that the more I sort of embraced that side of myself, the more I found power in it, this idea of like growing shamelessness directly out of pain. And I know we're not onto the book recommendations yet, but one of the things I'm going to talk about when we get there is there's an amazing spoken word artist called Joelle Taylor, and I remember the first time I saw her read, she was wearing this like tailored tweed suit with this coif that like went about a meter in the air, and there was this moment of just like, oh, that's it, that's the thing. And that's so much of what I aspire to as well in terms of shamelessness, is like, you need to see yourself reflected back at yourself in order to recognize it. When I first saw Hannah Gadsby, my life destroyed. Like, I could just like, fuck, okay, there we go. So there are some patterns. But that's why I need to do a serious one. I'm done.
I think for me, because I write a lot of kind of speculative and gothic horror, I feel like that's a really great platform for discussing the rot and the decay and the kind of dark sides of humanity. And as we know, writers put all their trauma on the page, and it's very cathartic. But so I'm like working on a novel, and it's very queer, but it's also very set in the Victorian era. And I like flip-flop so much on like how much, like you have my attention. And I flip-flopped on how much to fit it into the conventions of what people would expect of like a historical book set in that time. And I think also Gothic horror, there's like, your protagonists suffer so much. And I just kind of got to a point where I was like, no, I don't want them to suffer anymore. Like, so much of it is unpacking the familial trauma and the secrets of the house and, you know, all that good Gothic shit. But at the end, I kind of was like, I want to give them some joy. I want to like help them. I don't want this to be a shameful thing. Like they never feel shame about their sexuality. It's all the kind of external characters and society that make them feel ashamed of it. And their like love interest starts internalizing that shame, and so you've got this dynamic where one person is so confident and is so like firmly planted in not accepting that, and the other person is starting to creep. And I relate to both those things because I think it just so much depends where you are on a particular day, what your mood is like, what your own kind of strength is like. So basically I'm saying I've just put all my trauma in my writing and worked through a bunch of stuff there. Yeah.
I think for me, my sort of concept of shame comes from this very Latin American idea. The actual word in Spanish for shame is vergüenza, but it's like a concept, especially within Latin America, that was brought over from colonial Spain. And this idea of like the shame of like society like looking on you and stuff, and like, you know, so a lot of this had to do with like empire and colorism. So, you know, when people started marrying indigenous people throughout the Americas, and like where were you on the color bar, and what would people think of you? And then you think of sort of Catholicism as a form of colonialism, and this idea of, oh, you know, you're sleeping with sort of the plantation owner out of wedlock, and what will the people think when you have your baby, and you have shamed our family. And this idea that it's sort of what you were saying earlier, Callie, like it's projected upon us, you know, you can go through life, you know, living outside this binary and thinking, I can play with a doll if I want to. And it's, you know, as a cisgendered man, like who once was a cisgendered boy, you know, you hit this point where someone says, boys don't play with dolls. And like, it takes that little boy out of that moment. But like, as a little boy, I never had that understanding until someone introduced it to me. And so I think it's that idea of like, when people freaked out, you know, like when my grandmother walked in and seeing me playing Barbies with my cousins, it wasn't that she was necessarily ashamed of seeing me in that act. It was, what would people think? And I think that's very true to queerness. And so through writing and trying to work towards joy, I think it's about sort of honoring this pain, but trying to like almost just blow up the picture and think of the possibilities. I like what you were saying, Kat. In my prose work right now, I'm doing that a lot of thinking, okay, what if I sort of usurp this idea of what you expect of a queer character? And so in the novel that I'm working on, you know, he does battle these sort of things, the protagonist, Daniel, but his family, you read them on paper and you think maybe they'd be homophobic, you know, they wouldn't know what to do with him. But no one sort of presents that way. It's almost what he expects. And then when he kind of is able to see outside himself, you know, having to really work through it, just the possibilities are endless that he's able to then work towards this idea of joy and the idea of belonging in a very intersectional way. But I think in order to get that, it's, you know, what Kat was saying and Éadaoín and Callie is like, you have to confront that darkness and that pain in order to feel shameless, because it's there and then you have to almost reject it. And it's harder, it's easier said than done. Is that the right phrase? Yes. If it's not, I don't feel ashamed that I butchered it. And that's my answer.
That's actually a perfect segue to the final question, and then we're going to hear some more readings, which is around language and the use of language. And I just want to share a quick quote by poet Balgina Mort, who said, "Lacking language is the beginning of a poem to me." And I'm really interested in, you already started mentioning about your practice and your upcoming work and how shame surfaces in that, but how do you relate to the language of shame? How does that come up in your work specifically? And how do you think you put language at risk? What do you omit? How do you use it? Yes, Callie?
If I may. So my upcoming concept album on the 20th of November, Catabasis, an Underworld Opera, is my studio debut. I've spent the last year literally underground. It was in an underground studio, completely in the dark, never ever in the daylight, recording this work, which is an allegorical descent to literally hell, based on one of the worst experiences of my life. And I've started to create mythologies in my work that are amalgamations of existent mythologies to borrow from various different theological backgrounds, because I've realized that the shame that I feel and the intense pain that I've felt through this particular experience that the album addresses is so great, so gargantuan, that language is not sufficient. It comes from the void. It comes from the nameless. And that's what all of these traditions, all of these especially esoteric kind of mystery traditions historically were trying to express the inexpressible. And I feel that noise music, for me, has become the perfect medium to express the inexpressible. Because, like I said...
Sorry to interrupt. Do you need water? Okay.
Cool. And yeah, it is noise is the perfect way to express the inexpressible, because, you know, a lot of the time you're working and it's conversational. You're conversing with the art as you create more noise is created, and you converse with it in a way that something comes out of it that you didn't realize would come out of it. And for me, that is my language. My language is the untranslatable language. It is the wordless, the nameless, because that's where I feel I occupy space in society. This liminal, if we want to get art school about it, liminal, visceral, juxtapositional space. You know, this non-binary kind of modality of living, very Baphomet, you know, very, very androgynous, very that. And I think that that's what non-binary people, you know, gender non-conforming people throughout history, especially in indigenous cultures, have built is this connection to the divine and to other, to the beyond, whatever you want to call it, to the void, to the abyss, through seeing that, we get given as trans people, we get given this amazing insight into the God-honest truth that these meat sacks, they ain't nothing. What is this? It ain't shit. It ain't shit. We are worth so much more than that. Like, we are so much more, so much more. And it's in these moments of maybe hearing something beautiful, maybe hearing something so devastatingly shocking that it throws us out of our body and into a state of stupor. That moment is when we understand that we are so much greater than this fucking meat sack, this organ bag. Gross. And yeah, that's pretty much all I've got to say.
In terms of what you said, language at risk, or how shame appears in practice. The first thing that occurred to me when I heard that question in terms of language at risk, I just thought of minority languages, and the fact that I introduced myself bilingually and have been practicing more and more this connection to Irish, because despite the fact that we were doing it in school for 18 years, I'm still not fluent. Which is not about me, it's about the Department of Education. I mean, my first name is in Irish, and it's always this kind of opening salvo of like, oh, what's your name? Éadaoín. Oh, how do you spell that? It will not help. I have all the vowels except you. Thank you. And so in terms of, I'm serious, I'm going to answer the question. In terms of language at risk, I always think about minority languages because it's always sort of appeared odd to me that I even speak English. I remember growing up asking lots of awkward questions to my history teacher, who was like, I don't want to fuel a Republican. Don't really know how to answer this. And it's something that I come across more, after I moved to Scotland and realized that as minority as Irish is in Ireland, it's even more so for Scots Gaelic in Scotland and for Scots as a cognate. And so I'm interested in using Irish in poetry that deals with queerness and in readings that deal with that, and bringing those two things together and not offering any explanation, just simply saying, there it is. I don't really care what you make of it, there it is. Partly because it's my name on it, so you've already got a hint. And so in terms of how shame, I think, comes into that, it's really trying to dig through what ways in which Irish as a kind of onomatopoeic language, using it to absolutely suffuse what I'm trying to express, and in a short while you will hear just that. And the idea that, in order to fuel language at risk, you need to actually embody it, you need to use it. Language can only be not at risk if it is used, if it is voiced. One of the best examples I can give of that is Harry Josephine Giles' Deep Wheel Orcadia right now. If you haven't read it, read it. If you haven't read it, then you need to go immediately, now. I'm sure it's in the back somewhere. It's this phenomenal expression of Scots and queerness, and it's in space, and it's amazing. And I think so much about how, traditionally these languages haven't necessarily been peopled by queerness and by other identities. And so that is how I try and bring those two things together. Yeah, that's it.
So despite being biracial, I am not bilingual, and that is often a source of shame for me. So whenever I go home to the Philippines and speak to kind of family and friends, I can understand it, but I cannot speak it. And there's that idea of being able to communicate but just one way. And so last year I spent time writing a short story collection that is set in kind of a fictionalized version of the Philippines, and I decided to set myself the challenge of including some Tagalog, which is the main national language of the Philippines. But the Philippines is hundreds of islands, and each one has its own dialect. And then we have the Spanish to thank for coming in and destroying a bunch of our old scripture. So we don't actually have a lot of like the older written language before those dialects, and kind of English and Spanish are the kind of official languages of like government and things like that. So it's really interesting because like my mum can speak Tagalog, but she can't necessarily communicate with people who speak a different dialect. Like there's some crossover, but again, there's a kind of communication barrier. And so for me, it was this idea of like reconnecting with this language that I've never really known, like it will always feel foreign to me. And part of that, I think, is like the immigrant experience of people coming to a different country and trying to assimilate. And that assimilation means kind of casting off things that you don't feel will necessarily serve you. And I was specifically not taught Tagalog as a child because the idea was that it would that I wouldn't get as good at English. And also just the way I was taught to speak was like this, was received pronunciation despite coming from East London, and therefore that was another kind of like othering of language. And I think when I kind of talk to my mum now, it's really interesting because I remember like her feeling really insecure about her English and being made to feel insecure by other people, and she's like so smart, but I think that when you're having to communicate in a language that is your second or your third or just doesn't make you feel comfortable and confident in yourself, I can't imagine how devastating that is. And I'm super aware of being an English speaker and going and living in places, and you know, I've lived in Canada and I kind of just rocked up there, and because I spoke English, it was so much easier to move to another country. And even moving up from London to Scotland was so much easier because I kind of had that kind of lingua franca. So the kind of the immigrant ideal of like assimilation has been complete, and now I'm trying to unpack all of that. But I know that I will never become bilingual, but I hope that that is something that I can, I don't know, I'm like, if I have children, maybe my mum can teach them. I'm just hoping to like bridge that gap and kind of to undo that harm that was done, and that shame that she feels about language, and that, you know, English is a language of oppression a lot of the time, and that assimilation is not the way, because you lose so much. And so trying to reclaim what has been lost, even if it's like a shadow of that, is my aim. So yeah.
I think for me, when it comes to language and this idea of shame and risk, I've been, especially in my poetic practice as of late, really trying to be more confident to use Spanish more. You know, I would not say I'm fluent. I'm like almost there, but you know, if you were a fluent Spanish speaker, you'd very quickly suss out that I would use the wrong conjugation, or I might have to interject a bit of Spanglish. But I think using Spanish, and then having grown up in a very Catholic household, in a very Catholic sort of ethnic group, I've been trying to reclaim sort of Catholic language, Catholic prayers, sort of these kind of phrases that are very based in a certain faith group, and Spanish, to talk about queer identity and queer love and kind of unpack my own sense of self. And I think, you know, so that's how I sort of weave in language in terms of sort of risk and what risk is there. I think of risk, and then I think of like danger, and danger is like the violent oppressor. And I think in my writing, if I'm correct, I don't think I ever name the oppressor point blank. Like I don't use the word racism or homophobia or queerphobia or xenophobia or racist in any of my poems. So it's sort of riffing off of what you were saying, Callie, and this idea of like the noise. I think it's there, and I don't have to name it. And I think if you are a part of any of those intersections that I identify with, and the poem is speaking to that, I think you will know. And if you're not a part of those communities, I think if I'm a good enough poet, you'll feel what I'm trying to do, but I don't have to say, in this poem, I'm going to tell you about a really an experience of homophobia, a violent homophobia that I dealt with at the age of 25. I hope the poem does that. But I also think it's about not having to pour out all of one's trauma. So I don't think I need to name that. And I think as a poet, I choose poetry because I want to sort of distance myself a bit, but I want to lay claim to that trauma in a way that serves me. And if I write a brilliant poem that gets in a collection that you buy and makes me money, great. But I can choose to do that, and I don't have to be so obvious. And so I think I like that idea of the noise, and I'm gonna take that. Thank you. And that's my answer.
Thank you. Your last point, Andrés, just reminded me of the poet Ordorica Callie, who's a Black American trans poet, and they write a lot about, I don't know if anyone knows their poetry here. No nods. Not yet. But they write a lot about their trauma, and I listened to this podcast where they were saying, some of the readers might think that they know them after reading it because it's a lot in there, but they were saying, actually, that's just half of it, or not even half, and they don't have to pour everything out into the pages because, as you said, they're doing it what serves them, and it's not for the reader to read something very traumatic and just feel like they know that person now. So that's an amazing sort of thing to share with everyone. Thank you, everyone. And we're going to do a round of readings and the highly anticipated book recommendations that almost slipped out at the beginning. So yes, if we can go around and a reading, the final reading is supposed to be something more playful or hopeful around our theme of this evening, shamelessness, and a book where you really feel like the author has told the story or the poem in a really shameless way and really owned that. And so, Andrés, I'll start with you.
Okay. I'm going to give my book recommendation first, right, before I do my reading. So my book recommendation is Dryland by Sarah Jaffe, which is an amazing book that was published in the UK after its US publication by Cypher Press, which is an amazing LGBTQ publication based down in England, and you should totally support them. And I think what's brilliant about that book is I think the protagonist has to work towards a sense of shamelessness. I think she really does not know what to do with what, as an older queer person, you're like, girl, you're gay. But it takes her a while. And I think she has to really work towards that, and she kind of hits her stride and then has kind of like a bit of like unraveling before reaching a sense of peace. And I think that, again, I'm just like riffing off of everything you said, Callie, and I hope this is recorded because they were brilliant answers, but this idea that sometimes the pain has to keep coming back in order to relinquish it. And I think that's a brilliant example. And that leads me to my reading, which I'm going to do standing and not fall. Yes. Okay, so as a trigger warning, or two trigger warnings, this poem, it is joyous, but it does mention death, and it also uses the word faggot, both in Spanish and English. This is a very new poem, and I wrote it about 2 weeks ago whilst attending a very amazing workshop led by Joelle Taylor, which was produced by Recreation Anthology and Éadaoín and Alicia, and it was just stunning. And the whole premise of the workshop was to take the idea of the praise poem and to really sit with oneself wherever we, each individual poet, find our most sort of honing in on where family is within the LGBTQ spectrum and writing something to serve that community. So this is for my family. This poem is called In the Name of the Joto, Mariposa y Maricón. I offer this prayer up in the name of the joto, limp-wristed mariposa y irreverent maricón, the ones who saw bravado like the Spanish Inquisition, a machismo that could smell testosterone, death dropping off the scale, ready to kill us. I bear witness to the little boy swaying hips like whirlpool, washing machines while dreaming in sequins leotard, red lipstick, diamante encrusted bustier, imagining us as our own leyendas, madre divina, anything for Selena, anything for us. My incantation of cumbias and merengues will summon memories of watching our parents dance and studying not our fathers, but our mothers who art in heaven, longing to be held in that way, beautiful and vulnerable, spotlit and telenovela pretty. I lift my hands up, blessing this Eucharist, this altar before us, divining the DJ to play one more Palina, Thalia, Shakira canción, porque under our abuela's eyes, we are safe. Ay, hijo, calmate, and leave him alone. He's just having a little fun. As we shake our bitty bum bum while watching the clock, because when the clock strikes 1, then we're done and back to little boys we go. So worship with me in this sacred moment when we are safe in this communion. Let the música y ritmo protegerte, my little apostles. Praise the joyful color, luminous freedom as you repeat after me. We are holy faggots, santos maricones. We are happy little boys having a little fun. We are laying claim to who we really are inside. Holy, holy, holy boys. We are beautiful, telenovela pretty. We are our own leyendas. We are butterflies unfurling from our chrysalis. We are holy, holy, holy. We are whole. Amen.
I'm going to follow suit and give my book recommendation first. So I'm recommending a short story collection called Never Have I Ever by Isabel Yap. And she's a Filipino author, and they're kind of speculative horror short stories with a queer cast of characters. And honestly, I read this collection and then I was like, why do I even write when she's already written this? But it's so, so good, and it's full of joy, it's full of horror, and it's great, and it's set in the Philippines. So that's my book recommendation. And I'm not used to paper and all of the problems that come with physical readings. So I'm going to read a piece called Lumpia, and lumpia is a kind of Filipino spring roll. Lumpia, my favorite kind of spring roll. I used to think spring rolls were interchangeable, but not this one. Days dipping fingertips into the water to wet the sides of thin, translucent crepe paper pastry. We mixed the vegetables, meat, and heavy doses of herbs and spices, mixed it sticky into round bull babies, and rolled them into their blankets, wrapping them snugly, and folding the covers with the intricacy of napkins or origami swans. The thrill of you holding the pan and me dropping in each one with a sizzle. I watched your patience, your lumpia perfect symmetrical rows of dancers. It was always clear which were the ones I had made. Irregular and made with love, but not skill. And you would always choose those ones to eat. We plated them and let the kitchen roll absorb the oils. We would get soy sauce and Mang Thomas banana ketchup, swooping them into the cold dip, steam pouring out from the first bite. I never had the patience to let them cool, and I still don't. I loved the crisp crunch as the pastry would chip and fall, the warming golden fried delight, and the piping hot surprise. It would be a day of cooking and grazing, always eating or rolling or frying. As I eat this lumpia from a local restaurant, a stone's throw from my flat, a special lockdown treat, I think of my mother on the other side of this island, And so I text her to ask her for her recipe. Thank you. Filipinos love food and eating. Like, if you get invited to a Filipino dinner, go, because it will change your life. And I think food is often a kind of sign of love, so we love eating. Would recommend.
Do you cook a lot?
Can we come?
Yeah.
No, I'm a terrible cook. I'm an okay cook, but like, my mom is a great cook, and the rest of my Filipino family are great cooks. So find some Filipino chefs, befriend them. It will make your life vastly better, I promise.
Right, we're going to start with book recommendations. So I am going to start by telling you about Joelle Taylor's. I know you've heard her name a lot, and it's for a reason. Her newest collection is called Conto and Othered Poems, and it's not a bad word because it's actually Latin. Her new collection, Conto and Othered Poems, is this like searing memoir / stage production about underground gay, but specifically lesbian culture of the 1980s in London. And it's just a phenomenal piece of work. Words are sort of pointless at this point to describe it. It's just phenomenal. And I know that there is going to be a stage production of it at some point in London, which, as somebody who lives in Scotland, I find homophobic. But whatever. So yes, I'm assuming it probably is in the back somewhere, but you'll find it elsewhere. Anne Lister was a Tory landlord, lesbian. 1 out of 3 is not bad. Most renowned for her an incredible volume of intricately detailed diaries. There's over 5 million words written, and most of it is written in a code that she created herself. Living at the turn of the 18th century in Yorkshire, Anne Lister did not only write in code about her explicit gay sex, of which there was a lot. She refers to orgasms achieved as kisses. I think one entry actually opens with, "Had 2 kisses before breakfast." Very good. But the thing that sort of astonished me as I was reading Anne Lister's work is that she did not just only write in code about explicit gay sex, but also about her insecurities, about her appearance, about the amendments that she made to her clothes to be less feminine, and these kinds of things happening in Yorkshire in the 1790s. And it's an anthropological treasure trove, but it's also something that sort of stirred a lot of inspiration for me. So on the theme of letters, this is Letter to Anne Lister. Tell me about Jax, and why you dress all in black, your sixth sense for desire, the sick satire of juvenile. We don't speak, but I am full up with you and fit to burst. Since you love and only love the fairer sex, I'm happy you found them ripe as pears for someone who had a taste for it. Flung out of space, you were no angel. Tell me about M, who owns your heart, but alas has got the piles. Or Tib, if the discharge is venereal. All the places your mouth has been, and every word you didn't say, these are my curriculum. Your words have magnetized me, stroked, rubbed, struck everywhere. I am a live wire. I thought to take your top hand, tap your cane, learn your crypt hand while you watch. Ciphers within your private entries. There is nothing so bittersweet as coded touch. Your kisses are legend now. Penetrating looks, you were waiting on ladies in waiting for men to disappoint them. For you, I want to wear all black, bind my chest in a way you might despise, but for how you sewed leather onto clean stays, laced into hide and hiding, bound as tough outside as you grew inwardly. Maybe that is why you wrote in cipher about clothes just as much as sex, of wearing drawers with men's braces and waistcoat. Do you still suppose yourself in men's clothes and having a penis? I know your happiness depends on this. You took all in good part, striving against hope that someone in some future time would think of you, scratching your truths into code beyond translation. Thank you. I wanted to end this reading with something a little closer to home. It's much shorter. A poem that is forthcoming in the Fawn Press anthology Elements. The title, Hua or Hotha, depending, refers to an Ogham symbol, and that, because we're talking about Ireland, Ogham is spelt with a G. And that was the runic alphabet we had in Celtic times. It sort of looks like a H, but it's lost its left leg. So Hua itself also means the hawthorn. And it does have some Irish in it, you have been warned. I use the word guiha, which means winds, and also shkachgyal, which means hawthorn. The reason I wanted to end with this is because, a lot of what we've been talking about is sort of putting together these ideas about identity and homeland and belonging. I'm really glad things are changing. So thank you to Lighthouse, to Almat Press, fellow panelists, Assembly Roxy, for everything tonight. This is Hua. Blowing through teeth of a dry stone wall, the gale, Guiha, summons a sea behind it, scraping rivulets from the land, making scraw of the hawthorn. A gale is better than a blast, a fairy wind, sudden and quick, compassed by terrible quiet. But this screeching air twists hawthorn askew in dense, wiry gnarls that crease the sky. Wind supplants its branches, intersecting their upward glance, a perfect three crossroads. Guiha is wise, teaching the briar its name, shkachgyal, hiding thorns beneath its blossoms. Fissures in the wood appear with age, wrinkles like scars, and do not die, even when that scent is on its petals. What sharp ache brought someone to a fairy tree and dare touch it, skin its skin, pluck its fruit, tear its leaves? Bound into briars, pierced in the side with hope, until the air was silent. Petals frozen in suspense, waiting for the wind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Andrés, thank you so much for... Okay, so backstage we had a moment where we were like, so what's everyone's book recommendation? And I was like, I knew that someone would choose mine, and you were very gracious and had a backup. I didn't have a backup. It was a RuPaul's Drag Race Snatch Game situation. I was like, I don't have a backup. It's got to be me. So I really appreciate you. So my book recommendation is Andrea Lawler's Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl. Iconic book. Oh my God. You want to talk about Shameless? Oh, honey. It's the first thing that comes to mind, which is probably why both of us chose it. Oh, is it here? It's probably here. I can feel it. It is iconic. And, what an unexpected encyclopedia of queer culture it was. I was like, huh. No, I'm feeling moved by the spirit of gay Jesus. It was great. And it's about this alien being, you know what, just read it. I don't want to spoil a single thing about it. Like, it is just from front to back. Absolute.
Is it being held up there?
Yes! Paul Takes the Form of a Mortal Girl by Andrea Lawler. Yeah. Also, the audiobook is really cool and read by this super cool non-binary person I can't remember the name of right now. But anyway, I would like to finish with a reading of a poem that I wrote super recently. I was just feeling a moment of peace and calm and serenity for once. Like, what a concept. So I was like, I better catch this quick. And write it down before I lose it. It's called Lessons from the Willow House. I'm going to stand up. Lessons from the Willow House. I have learned in a stitch-picked patch of sky to love myself, one moment at a time. Moments laying on top of one another, like naked bodies, offering warmth as sacrament. I have learned in a stolen loaf of bread to be with myself, one slice at a time, holding the wheat to my nose, to breathe in the harvest and know what I have reaped. I am learning in a shattered locket, consigned to never being opened again, in its broken hinge and the brute force that broke it, that I am more than this, than the visage of a silken scarf, taking flight in a breeze and leaving such vital blood vessels behind. And I will learn again, in a bed, in a room, in a house made of willow, to remember who I am, and the fruit the seed came from, and the leaves rotting into everything I never was. I will learn this, all of it, from ancient tomes and the briefest note, penned in a single breath. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone else. Oh, gorgeous, gorgeous, the lot of you.
Great, what a night. Thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing your experiences on your identity, your practice, and really having an evening of a bit of a celebration on shamelessness rather than focusing so much on shame. So just another round of applause to say a big thank you. And you can buy probably all the recommended books here tonight or from Lighthouse Books. And a concept album. Please share more how people can...
So that's coming out on all streaming platforms, Spotify, all of that stuff. And it's also going to be... Well, the launch, unfortunately, is sold out now, but... The album is coming out in vinyl at some point in 2022. So I guess keep an eye out. Give me a follow on Spotify. That'd be so kind of you. Thank you so much. You can do your like trans ally good deed. I am going to play the card and I will exploit it. Yes. So yeah, if you want to be a good trans ally, listen to my music. Because really, that's what you need. No, you need to do so much more than that. But it's a good start. Yeah, and you know, good luck. Very triggering. Trigger warnings abound. In fact, the whole thing is just one big trigger. But like, remember what we said. The arc. The heart. Stay present. Namaste. Feel the pain. The pain is your way through, I promise you. And love you. Get me off. Get me off.
And yeah, and support all the other publications that are upcoming, and the anthology as well, which is available here, and also from Lighthouse Books. And no questions, but we'll be around for a bit. So yeah, feel free to come and have a chat, ask us anything. And thank you for being here this evening.